All right, welcome back, everybody, to the ATB NFL Live Show. As we said last week, we are coming back here with the NFC North now, and not just because I want to talk about the Steelers next week, but because this is a very fun division to break down. Some big changes, some small ones. Some teams really kind of went in a different direction. Other teams kind of try to stay the course and just build upon what they've been building. Looking at you, Lions, we'll see what we think about them. But in general, it's going to be a big episode. A lot of teams that we really are interested in for, again, multiple reasons. Some because we want to see, is that growth going to continue to be linear? Are they going to continue to get better? Some teams have a huge change, like the Packers, of course, which we'll get to them here soon. At quarterback, a lot of different things that we can talk about. But before we start, of course, co-hosts here, Tony and Zach. What do you guys think about this division last year? I want to start with this. We didn't really do that last year. We didn't really talk about our last couple episodes. We didn't really talk about like what our overall thoughts were after the year for this past year. What did you think about the division last year? Let's start with Zach here.
Yeah, I mean the NFC North, I felt was kind of annoying last year outside of just the Lions. Because look, the Lions are a good story, but like all the drama with Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers was just grating every single week. And like the fact that they like clawed themselves back into some playoff like talks and like it just
As
made
they
it
always do.
it made it unbearable, especially with the fact that now Rodgers like, yeah, I'm gone. See you later. And after all the crap that he gave those receivers, I was very vocal in the chats this year of how I felt like that was very anti like team building and that they weren't going to do anything that way. Which is one of the things I'm very excited to talk about today with the with the Packers. But then Minnesota, they're just there and like perennial. We're going to the playoffs, but we're not going to do anything more. And it's just grown tiresome. And I think everybody's just waiting for either them to make that next leap with Kirk Cousins, or finally just break it all down, pack it all in, and be like, "Yo, no, we can't do this with him anymore." But it doesn't seem like they're going that way. So we get one more year of the Kirk Cousins experience.
What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I thought last year was super interesting for the division. I don't know how often it was like it was definitely fun at times, but yeah, Minnesota overachieving to an infuriating level. Just like being completely their record being completely different than the team everybody knew them to be. And then Detroit falling short after their incredible end to the season. I think it was an 8-1 run to close things out. Like everybody's cheering for them. All they have to do is get a little help from Seattle losing, and they have to beat the Packers, and they did their job. Seattle didn't help them out. And so like Detroit not getting there last season was just upsetting, and that's how I'm going to remember last year in the division. Aaron Rodgers is gone, and Aaron Rodgers was bad in his last year. That's funny. And then the Bears, I think the Bears that last season went perfect for them, right? That was a perfect season for them because they saw Justin Fields develop a little bit. Like there's optimism there. It pushed them to make a all-in move where they're like, all right, now we really want to figure out who he is. Like we've seen a level that gives us comfort. Let's push in our chips. And so they trade. They get DJ Moore because the benefit of finishing dead last while still figuring out your quarterback situation is that you get to trade back, and now you pick up DJ Moore and a bunch of picks, and you get Darnell Wright, who's a stud at right tackle to solidify your offensive line. So now you've given a number one wide receiver and a great tackle. Like their last season went really, really well for the Bears. And we'll get into the Bears shortly here, but I think very interesting season last season. Detroit, I feel for them, and the Bears, I feel excited for them, and the other two teams are just kind of weird in limbo right now.
Yeah, the NFC North was weird because obviously the records would indicate that the cream of the crop of the division was the Vikings. But really, the three teams at the top of the standings outside of the Bears were all essentially in the same tier of team last year in terms of on-field performance, right? Now, it varied based on when we were looking at the season. Of course, the Lions started off very poorly. Things up in the second half of the year. Packers, similar story. The Vikings just kind of were out there surviving. They were lasting off vibes only. That was pretty much it. Like their point differential, if I'm not mistaken, was the worst in division outside of the Bears. I think the Packers were slightly better by the end of the year, if I'm not mistaken. It was very close, if nothing else. this team, these teams in general outside of the Bears, who clearly were just in like a semi-tank slash who's Justin Fields mode, like you said, Tony. They were all in that same kind of like conversation in terms of where they rank in the NFL. And the Vikings, of course, come out on top of 13-4, but we all kind of knew that that was going to come crashing down. They were building upon just miraculous comeback after weird fourth quarter after another. It was just every week it felt like something had to go their way at the end of the game, and it did. Will that repeat? Probably not, statistically speaking, which usually isn't the way that you win in the NFL, of course. It's going to be really interesting to see how this season finishes out this year because a lot of what these teams have been building upon the past 4 or 5 years could really either come apart or take off depending on how the season goes. So let's jump into it fully here. We're going to move on to the Bears. Of course, their last in division had the number 1 pick before the trade that Tony, of course, talked about to get DJ Moore draft picks. Ultimately, end up with Darnell Wright as the first round pick. Again, big additions on the offense. That's kind of the name of the game for their draft. But you also have a lot of stuff in free agency. So let's talk first about some of the things that they did do in free agency. The big one being Tremaine Edmonds, bring him over from your Bills, Tony, to be that cover 2, like Tampa 2 linebacker that, in the past they had Urlacher when they were running that type of defense. Now they're trying to get back to that type of style of defense. Want to run a lot of that cover 2, cover 3 stuff, and that's going to allow them to do that. Edmonds, I really think, did take a step up as a player last year, especially, and that's what got him that big deal. And I want to talk about him first with you, Tony. What do you think about that move for the Bears? You think that was a smart move, even with the money for him?
Yes. That's a really tough question to answer, and the reason it's a tough question to answer is I am a big believer that linebacker play and our perception of linebacker play, specifically our perception of it, is heavily determined by the front and the responsibilities asked of that player. In Buffalo, Tremaine Edmonds, the best defensive front he got to play behind was this past season, and by far. He was kept clean significantly more. His responsibilities were a bit easier because of that. So he had an excellent season because the front improved in front of him. And now, granted, he is a phenomenal player in his own right. I love him. I think he's an ascending player still. 5
and
years
he's
in.
only 25 years old.
Exactly.
Is he
5 years
even
in.
25 yet, technically?
Yes,
I think he might
yes,
still be. Oh, is he?
yes,
Okay.
He's 21.
Okay. Yeah, 21.
No,
Yeah.
but
He was born in
so
'98.
Okay. Yeah.
he's ascending still. Like, yeah, there is a world where this contract is a value for Tremaine Edmonds. However, the rest of their offseason tells me that this contract is going to look bad, at least in the first year or two, because they didn't reinforce the D-line at all. And so, like, yeah, Tremaine Edmonds is going to be himself. He's going to be a great player. He's probably going to look pretty good because Eberflus knows how to use his linebackers. But the superstar factor that you're hoping out of a signing like that, we're not going to see that unless they fix the defensive front. So, like, they have the money. It's one of those moves you can make when you have the quarterback on a rookie contract, but they have to understand, like, you can spend all that money on the linebacker room. It's better spent on the defensive line, and you're not going to get the surplus value out of those linebacker investments unless you build up the defensive line.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'll talk to you about this too, Zach, here. But I think the main thing with Edmonds, what I look at with him, is they wanted specifically his skill set, which is the ability, because of his length and his range, to play that cover 2, middle of the field and cover 3, Tampa 2 style defense. Like, that's what they want to do defensively. So as much as I do think his ability to impact, in the run game, especially because of that front not really being up to par, is going to be limited. But I do think that's why they signed A.T.J. Edwards as well, to kind of take that responsibility a little bit off of his plate and allow him to be that space player in the middle of their defense. I don't know how much of that's going to come to fruition this year because, like you said, the front is still going to probably be an issue for them. They drafted, a couple guys to try to fill that role. Zach Pickens and, Gervon Dexter, forget if it's Gervon or Gervon Dexter, but they drafted those guys and they hope that they can be the future of that position for them. But asking them to be quality players in year one, probably asking a lot, especially because Pickens is really pretty much a pass rusher at this point. I don't think he's going to offer much in terms of, clogging up lanes for, linebackers to come free. So it's going to be interesting to see how they use the linebackers. Is Edmonds going to be a lot of the time asked to kind of play away from the line, just so he doesn't have to worry about the front as much. And Edwards is such a smart player. He can kind of handle the run a little bit more than a lot of linebackers can, even when the front isn't that great. So we'll see how that works. But
let's remember too, Eddie Jackson's back this year.
That helps in the secondary.
Yes, and that's going to be.
I'd say Eddie Jackson is back, and like last year was the first year he's been good in like the last 3. So
yeah,
like,
I thought he was hurt last year though.
I thought for
they
maybe
had
a portion of the season, he came in and finally played well. With the previous 2 seasons, he was like dog shit. So yeah, like
there was
if they get a full season out of Eddie Jackson, at the level he played last year, yes. Yeah, like that is an impact.
We'll talk
and
about
Jaquan Brisker too,
here.
like great safety too.
Yeah,
I will say, like last thing on the Tremaine Edmonds front, he's gonna get put in hell in this division. Something we're gonna get into, I'm sure, as we talk through these teams, is they're all built to run the football pretty well. Specifically the Packers and the Lions, and it doesn't matter. Like, yes, Tremaine Edmonds will primarily be the Tampa 2, like, drop into coverage. What he can do to the middle of the field is beautiful, but if you are trying to win through the run game, you can put a target on his back and you will succeed. And so, like, he's going to be asked to play the bad side of his game way more than he's going to be asked to play the good side of his game. And so, like, that's year 1 outlook, not positive. I think the contract can still play off in the long run.
Yeah, they gotta get that front build up. So again, we'll get into strengths here with this team, and you guys can let me know if you disagree or not. But strengths for me, rushing attack. I love their 3-headed running back room. I think Herbert is still going to be able to play the role he's been playing, which is going to be perfect for him, because I was worried that he might have to kind of be one of the main guys getting carries. But when you look at,
I'm not so with him though. I wouldn't necessarily be worried about that. He can carry a full load.
I just feel like his best skill set is to be that.
The injuries are a little concerning at this point. And backup probably is like for longevity, but if he's asked to, he could absolutely do it. I like his best season came when he was given the rock at Virginia Tech, and that's what got him drafted. Like he was the main guy.
For me, though, using him as that change of pace because of his ability to break the game open. When he doesn't have to, when he's able to get 5 to 10 carries opposed to 10, 15 plus. One, the fresh legs for a guy that has that type of explosiveness is huge. And also, again, you bring in Roschon Johnson in the draft. You sign away from the Panthers. Deontay Foreman is what I'm thinking of, right? Correct. Yeah, I just want to make sure.
And they also took Travis Homer from Seattle.
Yeah, he'll be their kind of third down pass protector occasionally.
Exactly.
Well, for sure. That's his role.
Same role he's always had.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think with this 3-headed running back room, you're going to get a lot of different skill sets, especially with Foreman with power, Herbert with speed. Johnson, he's not the fastest guy, but I think he has got a little bit more, at least wiggle and more to his game, creativity-wise, than Deontay Foreman does. So you get a little bit of everything. I think my guess, and this is just because I really like Johnson, I feel like he'll probably be the quote-unquote lead back at some point this year. I really believe in that. But Foreman had a great year with the Panthers last year. Once the trade for McCaffrey was executed, we've seen Herbert already make big plays for this team. So rushing attack is going to be probably their biggest, especially when you factor in Fields, their biggest strength offensively, of course, even with the additions they made in the passing game. But linebacker room, much improved. Again, Tony, I know that this year might not, really get a lot of that this year possibly because of the front, but they are at least going to be much better when they get opportunities, especially in the pass game. And the wide receiver room, honestly, because of the addition of DJ Moore, I really like the combination of skill sets that they have in the room right now. I am skeptical about whether Claypool can be a full-time slot receiver for them.
Okay,
I was
waiting for that.
If he's the third or fourth option in the passing game opposed to the second, I can get more down with that because Mooney
the third?
and Moore. I honestly, I don't
Cole
hate Cole Kmet as a player.
Okay, you're gonna count.
He can play.
Okay,
like
they also have Tunyon, and Tunyon was.
He'll have a role.
He's getting a lot of hype in training camp, which we don't know what that means in the long run. But
I don't trust him to have a huge role. But
I'm just because I'm doubting that Equinemius St. Brown. I don't feel like he has an Amon-Ra season in him. He's been in the league a little longer, and
he's not that type of player.
Like that's where I'm like Chase Claypool is firmly third receiver.
So, yeah, he's third receiver on the depth chart right now for sure. And then Tyler Scott, I do like the addition of him. I don't know how much of an impact he'll make year one, but he
I think Tyler Scott is your we might not pay Darnell Mooney
Exactly.
player.
He's going to be can he replace Mooney if we don't want to pay him if he has a big
Yeah.
year? Like that's really at least for this year, especially. Like, I don't think he's going to make a huge impact.
Did they
You might see him run
draft
some deep balls, but
the Joe Reed's a few years older. Never mind.
yeah,
he was Virginia, right?
Yeah, he was
Virginia,
a draft
yeah,
pick
yeah.
from the Chargers, actually.
Chargers, yeah.
Yeah, picked him up. But yeah, I don't hate this receiver room, especially with DJ Moore now. It can be the true like number one receiver. It lets the other two guys that are there play to their strengths more.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a quality group for Fields in his third year here to find out how much of a passer can he be. Which for me, getting into Fields, I want to talk about him a little bit with you guys. I really am optimistic about him as a player. I really do like what I saw from him last year in the running game, of course. Like, we knew that he was going to be a guy that could do that. Not to that extent. He did not look like that in college. Let me just put it to you that way. He was not that type of runner at the college level. No, he didn't have to be. But still, that it's something that we got to see from him this year that does elevate his floor as a player, just because if he can be that type of runner, he doesn't have to be now a top 10 passer to be a top 10 quarterback even. He can be in that sort of mold of like a guy that, to a lesser extent, to Lamar Jackson, who has really improved as a passer. But if he can be a top 20 passer and a top 5 or top 3 rusher at the position, you can get high level play out of him as a whole. So
Kyler Murray.
yeah, well, yeah, to a certain degree, yeah. But what do you guys think about? I want to start. I want to go to here actually. Here, let's start with Zach. Here, what do you think about Fields' outlook for this year, especially?
I really like what the Bears have done for, like, look, they went and got a wide receiver. They said, hey, we have the first overall pick. We need weapons for our quarterback. Who can we get? And the Panther was like, hey, we got this really fast dude. He caught that long touchdown and then got that penalty. Don't ignore the penalty, but like, he's really good. But they've also, like you said, Darnell Mooney, whether Chase Claypool is Chase Claypool, but they've been slowly building a team around Justin Fields. They're getting the protection. And he has the athletic ability to, like you said, just raise his floor to a point where even mediocre play for him is going to produce good offensive football because he is so dangerous with the ball. I also really like what they did in signing PJ Walker as a backup, because with his style of play, we've seen this with all of them. There is the chance of him getting hit more often than getting hurt. Bring in somebody who can be a spot starter and perform as a spot starter. PJ Walker has shown that he has that ability perfectly and has chemistry with the number one receiver already. So you brought somebody in that if they have to play together, you already have a connection. So they definitely, the Bears are definitely thinking this out through. And it's so nice to see this. It's a change of pace because the Bears were a force. They used to be a massive force in the NFC North, competing year in, year out. And it's been a while since they've really fielded a good team. So it's kind of nice to see some of these perennial like bad teams that we've grown to accustomed to seeing over the past few years start to get things figured out and see a clear direction in where they're going.
Yeah, I agree there, Zach. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I think he's definitely in a position to succeed this year, way more than last year. Last year we were all like, oh my God, they don't even like him. They're not trying to build around him. I think the tune has changed there at least. I think the next step, like, the players have been added. I would still like to see Luke Getsy, like, this might be counterintuitive, but simplify.
Yeah.
Justin Fields, like, the passing wasn't hard for him in college. Like, that's what he was good at. Like you said, like, we didn't expect him to be this freak runner. Like, we were all like, yeah, he's a
we
really
knew he had the
good
athleticism, but this is different from what we saw in college, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think the issue is he just looks like he's playing the position slow still, and if you can make him think less, maybe those athletic tools and that muscle memory comes back and he starts to, like, make it easier on him when he's passing. So, because if he can get to average as a passer and maintain his running ability, then you're talking about a really, really good quarterback. The receivers, I can't agree that like, I don't think it's a good receiver room. I think it's a better receiver room. I think that DJ Moore is a bona fide number one receiver with upside. I think Darnell Mooney is a perfect number 3 deep threat. Like, I want Darnell Mooney and Gabe Davis to have the same role. Right now, they both have the same role of being the number 2 on their team. Neither of them should be, though. They should be running deep routes. They should be the clear out guys. Like, they should be the number 3 wide receiver on their team. So I think you still need to inject somebody to push everybody else down the depth chart one spot. So you have DJ Moore as your 1
You need a
random
Jalen
name
Waddle
as your
or
number
like
two.
something like that.
Well,
Well,
if
I
you
mean,
get a
that,
Jalen
Jalen Waddle
Waddle,
would be nice, but I
Well,
like
yeah.
I don't need that. I just need something a little bit better.
I'm trying to. Well, like, I'm sorry. I have the amazing like wide receiver selection.
You
here
need
where
a
it's
top
like,
10
hey,
wide receiver as your number 2.
Sorry, that's thinking too close to home. Who's another great number 2? Because like, I mean,
I'm
Keenan
talking
Allen
like you need
and-
like a
and Mike
Christian Kirk or
Williams
somebody.
Christian
like,
Kirk or something like that. Okay, yeah.
yeah, that's all I'm asking for here. But the offensive
Hey,
line,
that's my number 2
I think
receiver. You can't blame me there.
the offensive line is like really good, which gets me the most excited because Justin Fields' life is going to be easier. He's going to have to think less about the guys directly in front of him, so he can start thinking more downfield. So bringing in Nate Davis and Darnell Wright on the right side is just like, that's why I feel really good about Justin Fields this year. Is the offensive line in front of him is going to keep him upright, keep him from having to run away from sacks, and let him settle into football.
Yeah, I think kind of going off what you guys have already said, I think the key with Fields is he has to be able to trust everyone in front of him. And he's not been able to do that at any point in his career so far, right? The receiving group, although I understand, Tony, your sentiments on it, when you think about what he's worked with and you think about...
it's definitely good enough for him to take a step.
And you also think compared to like even some other teams in the NFL right now that kind of are wondering who is their wide receiver one? Or what kind of skill sets do you have to work with? Like, I look at a team like the Raiders who have a ton of weapons, but their 2 of their top receivers are both slot guys. So how do you work that out? Like, are they a better receiving core technically because they have Devonta Adams? Still, yes. But I think their skill sets compete a little bit. I think when you look at a guy like Chase Claypool, you look at a guy like Darnell Mooney, they're clearly different players and have different skill sets and different roles that can complement stuff alongside DJ Moore. So I think that is going to help him a lot. I also think that, like you said, the offensive line, it has a floor now of like,
yes,
you should at least be passable in both pass protection and run blocking, where Fields isn't going to have to assume somebody's about to kill him, right? Like he should be able to, through training camp, through practices, through game reps, be able to figure out, okay, that clock in the back of my head isn't quite as fast anymore. I should be able to sit here and go through my reads and make the right decision and not have to worry about, okay, does the ball have to come out right now or do I have to run? Now, we're going to see him probably still take off a ton, still feel uneasy in the pocket because he's still a young player. Yeah, but I think it should at least be something that he shouldn't have to worry about as much. Now, if he just can't get past that mentally, then we'll be able to find that out pretty quickly, right? Especially if the pass blocking is holding up and he just isn't taking advantage of it. But we also have to think about, and you talked about this like for him in college, Tony, depending on how you know, obviously I feel a certain way about PFF and a lot of people feel a certain way about PFF, but they had him as one of the most accurate quarterbacks that they've ever charted while he was in college. And that is not something that I'd be surprised to hear watching his college tape. He was a phenomenal passer in college. And not just because of Ohio State's receivers and their scheme, but he was legitimately just very good with the football, throwing it down the field accurately all over across the field. He has all the physical tools as both a runner and as a passer. If he can put it all together this year, this team could surprise people a decent amount. Like, I think that this team's ceiling is completely tied to how much can Fields improve in year 3. Does he just improve enough where they're like, clearly this is the guy, we just need to put the finishing touches on the roster? Or is it he blew up, he's getting MVP hype early in the season and it dies down because realistically it's not going to stay there, I don't think, unless he has like 1,500 rushing yards too or something stupid.
It would take something special.
Yeah, exactly. But like, can he have a couple games during the season where like, oh man, this guy is, this is Jalen Hurts-esque in terms of a leap, right? If you can get that from him this year, they could win more games than people think that they're going to win. So let's get into some of the weaknesses before we do our prediction here, just to move on from here. For me, I think that the main thing is pass rush and defensive line in general. We talked about this.
Yeah.
The linebacker room, as much as it is improved, it's probably going to take a year or two for them to actually settle in and become a great linebacker room simply because of who's in front of them. Travis Gibson was bad last year. I was kind of hoping that he could be a guy for them, and maybe he still can be, but it was really rough to watch last year. This entire defensive line just really struggled last year, and I think that they didn't do enough this year in free agency to really change that in any way. I like the fact that they added it in the draft, like I talked about before with Dexter and Pickens, but realistically, how much are those two going to make an impact in year 1? Probably not as much as they would have to make this not a bottom 5 group as far as pass rush defensive line is concerned. Secondary, it's young in some cases, in other cases, just unproven. Eddie Jackson also is kind of a question mark, like Tony talked about. Are you going to get last year Eddie Jackson and like early on Eddie Jackson, or are you going to get that kind of middling Eddie Jackson?
Those
So
like 3 years
yeah,
in the middle.
exactly. It was really weird. Yeah, it was just like his arc of his career was very strange, but hopefully he's back to where he should be. But and then offensive line, as good as I think it can be, I do think that it might not be a strength depending on how things roll out. If Tevin Jenkins gets hurt, and if he can't continue to stay healthy and can't develop as a guard, if Whitehair going back to center doesn't go as well as it probably should, I could see that kind of maybe being an iffy thing. And then you do have a rookie tackle in Darnell Wright. As good as a pass blocker as he was in college, what if he does just have kind of a rookie tackle season and really can't do much on the right side? That could impact things a lot. I do feel really good about Braxton Jones, which is good on the left side, but that's still something that we have to see. And in general, this team just, again, it's not complete, right? This is not a team that went all in the sense of like they added every position group they needed. They added veterans in every spot. They set up to try to go after a playoff run. Like, this is still certainly a team that is in the mid stages of a rebuild at this point. So expecting a ton from them is probably just fool's gold. But what do you guys think overall with this team at this point? Let's start with Tony here again.
Yeah, I think you really nailed the weaknesses. I'm going to start with your offensive line concerns and work backwards. Mm-hmm. I think those are super fair. I'm very optimistic about what this offensive line can be. Yeah. But you're right to point out it's not like it's a perfect unit. Like it was maybe like propping up. Like we saw Tevin Jenkins finally put it together. Had an elite season at guard.
He did.
He's done it once and he's been injured.
Yes, that's my main concern is injury.
Braxton Jones, 5th round rookie, really good season
he did. Really
at left tackle. That doesn't happen often, and regression, unfortunately, is possible.
Yes.
Cody Whitehair, like you said, it's a guessing game. I think it can't be worse than it was.
No, it can't be worse,
but the fact that it's different leaves uncertainty. And then I don't think there's any failure with Nate Davis. I think that's like perfect fit. Like way to go.
Great run blocker. He'll hold up well enough.
You paid him a lot of money, and you know what? It's going to pay off. And then Darnell Wright. Yeah, I love the guy. He is a pass blocker. He's one of the worst run blocking right tackles to be drafted in the first round that I can I can think of.
He has reps, but the consistency is just bad.
Yes, there are potentially downfalls to that group.
Yes. Yeah.
Defensively is where I see a lot of my concerns because
it's gonna be rough, probably still
incomplete.
The front is just really, really really bad. It's irredeemably bad. I feel terrible about the group that is playing in front of these linebackers.
The best interior player right now is Andrew Billings, probably
by a mile. DeMarcus Walker isn't that far off behind him, but neither of those guys
Walker's probably going to play a lot of edge for them. Honestly, though, is the thing. Like, I'm thinking interior guy. Like,
yeah,
so Walker's kind of one of those.
It'll be really
guys.
interesting.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting because like Gervin Dexter and DeMarcus Walker and maybe not Zach Pickens, but Gervin Dexter and DeMarcus Walker, you can either kick inside or play outside. I think they're going to have to be creative with how that goes, just because they don't have a ton of like true edge bodies, but they don't have a ton of true like 3-tech bodies either.
They don't. So like Dexter, I think is going to have to play 3-tech just because like size and athletic profile makes sense for that.
Yeah, but is Pickens going to play your 1 as just like a pass rushing 1?
You almost have to have
290. Like
Billings is going to have to play nose for this team. He has.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, but who's going to take the other nose reps? Because he's not going to be 100% player.
Dexter's big enough to do it, and he's a good run defender. But again, you don't want him to have to do that because I think his best role is to finally let him just take off. Because we learned recently that I learned recently at least that the reason why his get off was so bad is because Florida wanted him to stand up and read the offense before making a decision. So if his get off is anywhere close to what his athletic potential suggests, he has to be a 3-tech or a 5-tech. One of the two. He has to be half the time. So asking him to play nose is going to be tough. So Billings is probably going to play a lot of snaps this year just by default almost. You hope that he does almost.
He's going to have to. So it's a bad front. There's no way around it. It's a front that's going to get bullied by the other teams in this division. Yeah. It is the downfall of an otherwise encouraging roster, I guess would be the way to say it. I will say the secondary. So the back seven is both a concern and like an optimistic point for me. It's very
There's
young.
There's young talent to be happy about.
Exactly.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very young, very talented. Like Jalen Jones has been very up and down, but I like him as like a press man kind of guy. Kyler Gordon, rough season last season, but I think he's going to play the slot this year, and I think he's going to play it well.
That'll be good.
Oh, sorry, I said Jalen Jones. Jalen Johnson is the one that was Jalen Jones is bottom of the depth chart. He doesn't matter to me. Jalen Johnson is the one I meant to be speaking of there. But then Tyreek Stevenson hopefully can step in and play across from him day one. I think he'll kind of have to.
I think he's capable. I think he's one of the more ready players at corner in the draft. Like he might never be like a true like star player, honestly, in my opinion. But I think he'll be ready to go week one to at least be passable as a second corner.
Yeah, as like a bump and run number 2 corner in a developing secondary, absolutely. And then you have like Kindle Vildor, who's like all right depth. And then veteran, at safety, it's a really promising room, honestly. Mm-hmm. Like Zach had pointed out, like Eddie Jackson last year in what he was able to play last year was incredible. And if he does that for a full season again, you've got a stud at strong safety. You got Jaquan Brisker, who actually, I mean, they're both interchangeable, right? Like, I think they both kind of profile better as strong, but they can both play in the box. They can both play up high.
The Jackson has a little bit more coverage instincts, obviously, as like a
so they probably will sink Brisker into the box more often. But that's a really, really fun duo, and I mean the depth behind them isn't terrible. So the secondary is a concern for me, but I think it can turn into a strength of this team really easily. But overall, the defense is just a weakness. The entire defense I had listed.
Yep. Anything you want to add to this, Zach, before we get our predictions?
I think we're going to go straight into predictions. You guys, we've hit it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely want to talk about this team the most because they have so much things that are different, I would say. Yes. So let's get into our predictions here. So I'm going to start here. Yeah, they have a lot to.
The next one has a pretty big change.
The Packers have one huge change, whereas the Bears have multiple things that they're doing now that I would say that are interesting.
Yeah,
but we are going to get to the Packers in a second. But my predictions, so I have on the low end. I do think this team has a bit of a floor that they didn't have last year because they have added roster talent. Fields is going to year 3. There's more weapons. The running game should still be very effective. I think in a worst case scenario, you get a better version of what last year's team was, where there's still very clearly holes, but the overall talent's been upgraded. I have them as a 6-11 team. Like that's where I think that they kind of sit at as like if things just kind of progress naturally and nothing like goes off the rails or anything in either direction, they're sitting at like a 6-11 team. They're definitely not one of those like first overall pick types teams anymore, in my opinion. And I think in an absolute like they really go off and Fields is really looking like a true like star at quarterback, they could get up to that 8-ish wins or more. Like I really think they could, just because again the NFC is not super strong. This division is full of a lot of teams that are kind of in the same ish tier of each other. Like none of these teams are, I think, truly an overpowering force at this point yet. So I could see them creeping up into that 8-ish wins territory as well. So what do you think, Zach?
I have them sitting at a firm 7-10. Splitting most.
I like that.
Splitting most of the. I think that the Lions might sweep them. But splitting most of the other games in the division, they get the benefit of having the 4th place NFC schedule.
Yes.
They're playing the AFC West, right?
I believe so.
These two divisions are.
So the Chiefs are going to be, of course.
Chiefs, Chargers, Denver. Yeah, they could beat Denver.
So half of that schedule is tough in terms of the AFC West. I would say at least.
So. I mean, they have a favorable. They're also playing the NFC South, so they have a favorable schedule. In converse, depending on how the Jordan Love experiment goes, I think that they could end up sweeping the Packers because I don't know what the Packers are going to look like, and I just think that this could be two teams that play really well together. But I just don't. I mean, it's a divisional game. But like as far as like any sort of like outright sweeps for them in the division, that's the only one that I could really see.
Gotcha.
But yeah, a firm 7-10.
What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I think 7-10 is my true prediction. I agree with you. I think their floor is 6. Like I guess maybe 5 if
5,
injuries happen.
6 wins.
But we haven't really been baking injuries into the floor, so I'll call that 6. I think the rushing talent on this offense like sets that floor.
It does, yeah.
Ceiling wise, I do think they can get to like 10 wins. Like would it shock me?
I think it's possible. I didn't want to go that high.
Surprise me. It wouldn't
yeah.
shock me, I guess
Yeah.
is a way to say it.
Yeah.
So I'll say that that's achievable for them. I'd be very surprised. But if the secondary comes together, like we were saying, and the front is just below average and not dreadful, then yeah, this team could maybe win 10 games. I'm not going to predict it.
Yeah,
but
I think their weaknesses have to be like their very clear weaknesses have to become something that is
neutral,
a step above debilitating, right? Because it doesn't matter how good your offense is if your defense cannot stop opposing teams' running games or keep the passing games in check, despite the secondary probably being at least upgraded from last year, right? Like it's going to become one of those situations where if you're so bad at something, it almost doesn't matter how good you are at other things. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of what they fell into last year. They're so bad defensively that even the rushing attack and the occasional passing success just didn't equal wins, right? They couldn't keep teams out of the end zone.
That happened in so many games for them. I mean, think against Detroit the first time, against the Dolphins, against Dallas. There was a couple other ones where they were just going, and the defense just couldn't stop anybody.
Yeah, they just on those days they couldn't get the key stops, and I think that this team is better equipped to get those key stops by a certain amount. But again, how much is that going to happen? So
exactly.
But right, let's move on to the Packers here. Let's start with the biggest thing. I think we all kind of know what the biggest thing here is. They drafted 2 tight ends. Like that's crazy. And
easily the biggest storyline this offseason.
They got a lot more picks in this draft for some reason. It just kind of appeared. Because they traded somebody.
Yeah, they traded this guy. Like he got a weird stat. No, anyway.
He went and did a darkness retreat to find himself.
No, so Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, of course, longtime Packers quarterback. They're second of 2 consecutive Hall of Fame quarterbacks that they will have back to back.
Second of 2 Hall of Fame weirdos, too.
That is true as well. Well, I don't even know if I want to say Favre's a weirdo. He's just a bad guy, in my opinion. Not trying to get sued.
I think he's past the he's weird. Like he's just a terrible person.
Not a good guy, but that's beside the
well, I mean weirdo as in I was talking about.
I know.
He sent somebody a picture of his penis, so he falls into the weirdo bucket.
That was the thing that happened. Yeah. But no, Aaron Rodgers is finally mercifully off of this roster onto the Jets, who we'll talk about at some point later on in the series. But that is the biggest change, of course, for the Packers. Now, luckily for the Packers, this is not the MVP Rodgers that they're losing, at least not how he played last year. We'll see how that turns out for the Jets. But a Rodgers that just didn't really mesh with his team this year, right, this past year. So how much are they losing by moving on from Rodgers? Ultimately, that is up for debate. But, of course, that is the biggest change to this team. They now finally move on to a former first-round pick in 2020, I think it is now at this point, right? Wasn't that the 2020 draft for him?
It's a while back, yeah.
Yeah, it feels like it's that long at this point. Anyway,
yeah, it was the 2020 draft because you said you had him over Tua.
Yes, that is right, which I honestly, we'll get into that. Anyway, Jordan Love finally gets his chance to start for the Packers. Signed a kind of interesting deal on top of that to kind of set this up where he kind of bet on himself, but the Packers also kind of took away some respect.
Yeah, I think he almost hedged himself. It's a weird one.
He basically hedged because that's how I would.
He guaranteed himself 2 years of a shot instead of just 1 year, but he also guaranteed less money over those 2 years.
Exactly. He's like, I'm gonna bet these next 2 years will get me more money than this year will get me more money. That's basically what it was.
Okay, that makes sense.
Honestly, I don't hate that. I think it's kind of smart, honestly, for both sides. So
when you have Sean,
stay tied to LaFleur.
When you have Sean Clifford and Danny Etling behind you, I don't think much you have to worry about.
You're probably not going to be
Sean Clifford. He's a grizzled vet, nipping at the heels. All 30 years old he is.
Yeah, he's the most veteran quarterback on the roster. But no, so that's the big story. Is obviously Jordan Love.
He might be the most veteran person on the roster entirely.
It's funny, maybe. But that's the big story, of course, is Aaron Rodgers gone. Jordan Love is inserted into the offense. And this is an offense that, we'll talk about strengths here, is built upon their running back duo of A.J. Dillon, of course, and more so Aaron Jones. That is the identity of this team, and it's what's going to be the identity of this team. So that being such a huge strength is great. The pass rush, especially with Rashawn Gary returning, should be very volatile as well. very difficult to deal with. Probably, at least in my opinion, especially when they're healthy, the best pass rush in the division. I think pretty comfortably. Offensive
Comfortably,
line depth. Offensive line depth has been a huge thing for this team because unfortunately their starters don't like to play games, but it hasn't really mattered that much. So that tells you that the depth is good and it's going to be probably continue to be good. So even if David Bakhtiari doesn't play anymore, which is he going to? I don't even know what the situation is with that. Like I'm sure he's going to play, but is he actually going to play? We'll find out. But they've been able to make it work, so you have to give that as a strength. And the offensive coaching with LaFleur, right? That is kind of the main thing that even though you lose Aaron Rodgers, his system isn't exactly one that needs a MVP quarterback. It's great when he does, unlike Shanahan, like he will welcome that, but he doesn't need it necessarily to have an effective offense. I think that, and we'll talk about more about this later, but I think this a similar situation to the first year that Rodgers and LaFleur together, where Rodgers' overall numbers weren't spectacular, but the offense is very efficient. That's kind of what we're probably going to see more of this year, where it's more about getting the ball to the right guys, running the football. All that stuff is going to be more about that than Rodgers making huge plays. So that's what I would say with the strengths here. What do you guys have to say with that? Let's start with Zach here.
Do you not find their secondary to be a strength?
No, I do not, because Alexander's the only one that I trust currently.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I trust two. I trust three of the starting secondary.
Yeah, I was gonna say Savage and Douglas. I don't really have a problem with.
Oh no, I don't trust the safeties one bit.
No.
I just trust the corners.
See, I don't think Rasul Douglas is a bad player, but I think that he's a player that isn't going to get any better at this point, and it's more likely at this point that he probably regresses a little bit.
So then you were saying
he's getting up there.
Stokes.
I do not think Stokes is a good corner. I don't. So that's where I'm at with him.
And then honestly, like I think Keyshawn Nixon can go in and start and not be an issue at all. So like they got four cornerbacks I like a lot.
Yeah.
And then
two
enough. Safeties that I'm like,
Okay.
Fair enough.
Well,
But,
all right.
yeah.
No, their defense is. Well, I mean, when you're drafting Lucas Van Ness in the first round and he's in the secondary, but yeah, that's pretty crazy. So their defense is going to be set up to help Jordan Love actually get some actual that. I think if anything, their strengths of this team is that they have a lot of uphill potential, and then you look at the only real weakness is Jordan Love has had no playing time with any of these people. This is going to be a fresh, brand new jump in of what are we expecting here? Because we've only gotten preseason play. We haven't really gotten any firm, actual regular season play from him. So I think the best thing about this team and the biggest strength for Jordan Love is that he has a lot of people on this team who have been here for a while and know what the deal is, that he can lean back on that a bit. But will that translate to his game immediately? That's going to be the biggest question.
Yeah, what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, as far as strengths go, I think Matt LaFleur is the strength that matters most to this team.
Yes, the offensive coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, what he can do to design an offense makes your quarterback less important. And this is why earlier this offseason I said, and I don't know if I stand by it after fully watching everybody and understanding the state of the team, but I said that I think the offense might look better this year despite having worse players. And the reason I thought that is because it's Matt LaFleur designing the game and somebody coming in at quarterback and not challenging it at all and just accepting that, hey, this guy probably knows better than me. I'm going to do as I'm told. I'm going to lean on my run game, and we're going to make this work. So I still think it's going to look coherent and probably more coherent and more cohesive. I don't think it's going to be better anymore just because of the newness of everything. But Matt LaFleur is a major strength. I think Jordan Love, in his very small sample against the Eagles this past year, got me excited. Honestly, my favorite ball was that incomplete hole shot that the guy didn't catch on the sideline. I forgot who he was even hitting with that, but I don't know. I could see a path to him actually turning out and this working out for the Packers. Strengths. Offensive line, like you said, yes. The starters and the depth and the fact that they have so many guys who can play so many positions.
Yes.
You have Zach Tom and Elgton Jenkins. That's worth 4 total players because
it is.
They both can play 5 spots. And then you have good depth everywhere else like that. Defensively, like I said, I like the cornerback group a lot. And then I think the linebacker group is really good. I think Quay Walker showed some stuff when he wasn't getting ejected from games for being a terrible person, I think he showed some stuff that I was like, okay, yeah, this guy might actually work out. And then Devondre Campbell had another good season. It wasn't his elite season, but it was good. And the defensive front is just insane. So, like, real strengths that matter, I'd say you have good corners, you have a good defensive front, and your O-line and coordinator are awesome. Like, your run game's going to be great. The rest is up for question, but they have a lot of strengths across the board, more than I expected out of this team, at least.
Yeah, I think that for weaknesses, we'll jump into that. So I'm going to put quarterback question mark because we haven't seen it, right? So this could fall into weakness category. Now, I personally don't think it will, and I think probably we don't necessarily think it will because it's going to be hard for it to be a true weakness because of the fact that, again, we think LaFleur and Love are going to be a much more cohesive unit than Rodgers and LaFleur probably were, especially at the end, especially this past year. I think that Love is just going to take what's given to him and do the best he can with it. He's not going to try to do too much. He's not going to try to do things his way. And ultimately, as much as I think you said, Tony, like the offense might not be better, I think it's going to at least be more consistent. That's what I think it is. Maybe it won't have the highs, but it probably won't have as many of the lows either. There's some really, really rough moments this past year offensively for this team. And I don't think you'll see that as often because of that. Now, I do think, again, this is me personally. I know you guys are on a different train here. I think secondary outside of Alexander is at best just okay. I really don't think that this is a secondary that, especially because they're not going to be put in a position to man up guys, where I think that can kind of help take away some of the issues with the pass rush that they have, especially like you can afford to go to man coverage more. This team is very much a Vic Fangio style defense in terms of quarters, a lot of that stuff, a lot of off man coverage or off coverage in general. And they got burned for it last year a lot. They did. Now, a lot of that was injuries. The pass rush wasn't as good because of Gary going down and things like that. So if they stay healthy, that won't show up as much. But I think it does limit the ability to be a playmaking defense, especially. The interior defensive line outside of Kenny Clark, which, again, it won't matter as much because their pass rush is so good and the rest of the defensive line is good, unless they're going to play Van Ness inside sometimes and kind of make him more of like, not a true edge, then that interior group is kind of middling other than Kenny Clark. And then wide receivers just it's going to be volatile because, again, you have a lot of young players. Your three starters are all players that are going to have a maximum of 1 year experience, realistically, unless someone randomly comes in there to beat out, Dobbs or something, which I don't think is going to happen. I think Reed is going to be one of the starters as well, coming out of Michigan State, of course. Tony, you know him.
And they got Wicks.
Yeah, which I know you like him, yeah, but again, it's just a very young group at receiver as well. And tight end is even younger with two rookies. That's realistically who's going to be playing the most snaps for them. So there's a lot of, I think, potential for it to look ugly a little bit just because of the youth. But I think that it is going to be more consistent because LaFleur is coaching this team offensively. So what do you think, Tony, with the weaknesses? Anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think you pointed out all the major ones. Like a lot of their weaknesses are just uncertainty because
it's the
they are
unprovenness
heavily reliant on youth. It's really funny scrolling through their roster page on PFF and just seeing like their wide receiver room. There's only 3 players with grades at all.
Yes,
and it's Dobbs, Watson, and Samori Toure who like took like
all rookies
snaps.
last year. So literally all rookies last year.
There is upside in that because of that, but they are extremely reliant and dependent on youth, unproven youth. That's scary. I think the health of the offensive line is a concern. We highlighted they have good depth and they've built good depth because of the injury concerns.
But you still want to see your starters play.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have starters play. And Darnell Savage is an enigma to me. I think a lot of this season oddly depends on him because, like, I think if he plays well, like if he takes a step and he's a good safety, then the rest of the defense, like, this can be a really good unit. But a lot rides on him, and I don't think he's been very good. So I think they're very, very reliant on uncertainty. Is my biggest weakness.
What's weird with him, Tony, is I really think he's a slot corner. Darnell Savage's. I really think that's what he should play. And usually in a quarters heavy system, slot corners transition safety is like an easy, just like plug and play, like they're going to be good in that role. And he just hasn't been. And it's really weird to me because if he does play well, like you said, Tony, the secondary issues kind of do go away a little bit for me, but he's just not been good. So I can't really predict that he will be, because this is kind of the scheme I'd want him to play safety in if he's going to play safety. So it's weird.
Yeah, I'd almost like. I don't hate the idea of them just like admitting defeat on him and like.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather roll with Rudy Ford and Tarvarius Moore as my safety duo. The more I look at it, like.
Yeah, like it's weird, but.
It is weird. He's a very confusing player. The slot idea is very interesting. I don't know. I just think
it's
probably going to take
better
another team.
Athletically for him to do that, but it's weird. But what do you think, Zach? Any weaknesses you want to add before we do our predictions here?
No, the only thing I would say is I would amend your wide receiver weakness as to the same as the quarterback, where I would say wide receiver question mark, because
That's fair. That's fine.
I think the biggest thing this year for both Dobbs and Christian Watson is the fact they won't have that old man ragging on them week in and week out. That was destroying team chemistry. And look, I understand that like with Aaron Rodgers, he's been in the league for so long. He's like, oh, I want veterans. I want people who are like here to win. Like I don't want these new guys. Yeah. But that's how you build a team, man. And like at some point you have to get over the like, oh, I'm just here to win a championship. How dare I have to teach somebody, and be like respectful and like forthcoming with new people on the team and support them rather than push them down. I think got a little bit better towards the second half of the season, but just like from the get-go of not having him rag and not having like the quarterback be the one to be like, oh yeah, the rest of the offense was fucking awful, but I'm awesome though. Like, yeah, I'm Aaron Rodgers. What's going on? Like, because that's what it felt like last year. Like you could see him on the field just like not caring, and I was like
just mad at everybody.
I have never seen someone like more indifferent and like more just like I don't want to be here right now, and that could not have been good for the chemistry in the locker room. But yeah, this is an interesting team. I think they have a lot more of a swing than the Bears of being worse than we think, just if things really don't go well because of the youth.
All right, well, if that's the case, go ahead and give us your predictions then here first, Zach. We'll let you go start. I'll start here.
For them, because look, they've got that third place schedule, and they also play the AFC West, so there's that. I don't think they should have a problem with any of the NFC South teams, but I could just see if the offense doesn't click. I mean, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are going to go, but like we said, if it's always depth, if it's always all like, then we don't get our main guys up on the front line, then in the same category, like I have them at like 8 and 9, 7 and 10 in that area, and I think it could get even worse to maybe like a 5-win season if things don't go well. But I just don't see them. I think they're probably a season away if like they really like start hammering down some of the things that they need during the season and in the next off season after seeing what Jordan Love has. I think they're a season away from really being like, hey, we can compete again.
Fair enough. What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I agree. There is a floor lower than we're accustomed to with the Packers. I wouldn't go as far as to say 5, just because I think that running game, and I am optimistic on the defense, and like Matt LaFleur, the man was automatic at 13 wins for a few years there, so I think I'll call their floor 7 wins. I think it would take some true disaster to get down that low. I think I'd comfortably predict 8 and 9, 9 and 8 for them, and I think I don't think they have a super high ceiling. It's probably like 10 and 7. So yeah, I think it is a very narrow range of outcomes for this team. They're going to be firmly in the hunt graphics all season long, and I don't think they have the horses to get there in the postseason, but they're definitely not out of the picture.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm pretty similar to where you guys are at. I think that I'd be very surprised if they win less than 6 games, and very surprised if they won more than 10. I think that that's kind of their low end to high end is that 6 to 10. If their win total doesn't come in between those two, I would be shocked. So that's kind of where I have them. And I think more likely this is a true, like, right down the middle team again this year, just for different reasons, I think, overall. So 8 and 9, I think repeating that 8 and 9 record would honestly be kind of a win for a team that's losing a quarterback that's going to go in the Hall of Fame, even though it was the right time to do it. And it probably means that the guys they brought in, both, whether it's the new quarterback and some of the rookies, probably played well enough to justify where they were drafted, and they can kind of move forward in the next year, 2024, hoping for a lot more success that way. So moving to the Lions now, this is a team that I'm going to just assume that three of us are probably in agreement, should be the front runners for this division at this point. Is that the case for all of us here?
Yes, yeah, the front runners for sure.
Gotcha. Okay, not going to run away with it or anything like that. We don't think, but they are the front runners at this point.
Definitely.
So strengths here for them, I will say, offensive line, running game in general, offensive coaching, gambling.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, it's just really about the offensive coaching and the offensive line and what they can do because of it. So, for me, watching this team last year is very reminiscent of a team that they were trying to do this. There's such a huge gap between where they were at offensively, both coaching and talent-wise, and defense coaching and talent-wise. It was this weird combination that came together at the end to create a mid-team. So it kind of worked the way it should, where they were 9-8 with a really terrible defense and a really, really high-powered offense. Now it's about bridging that gap, right? So can you get to the point where the defense maybe isn't a huge liability? It doesn't have to be spectacular. And can the offense maintain what they did last year when Jared Goff did not look like Jared Goofball? Like, that's kind of what the goal of the season is, right? Is to put it all together to a certain degree. They added a ton to the secondary, and that was really their biggest weakness, was their secondary. They add a ton of that. They get C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They get my favorite corner from my team the past couple of years, Cameron Sutton from the Steelers. They bring him in, see what kind of role he has. Emmanuel Mosley, coming off of an ACL tear, I believe it was, who's really good when he played last year, but is an injury risk now. Bring in so much talent to that group. The linebacker room is going to be better because of a pick that was a little bit controversial, but they did make one that is going to help that room out as well. There's their draft as well. And this is kind of, I want to start here a little bit too, because they drafted, like, the year was not 2023, but 2003, but it might work because of what they're trying to do. And that's the thing about it, is they took really good players, but they didn't necessarily take players that other teams or other people might say are the best positions to take, right? They drafted purely for talent, not necessarily where they should be taking those types of players. But for a team that's trying to just figure out the gaps that are keeping them from making that leap, it might not be the best future move, but it probably will be what they need to do to get over the hump this year, at least, and get into the playoffs and prove that they are a playoff caliber team. So that's kind of my quick spiel on it. What do you guys think for strengths and weaknesses? Let me go to Zach here again.
So with the running backs and drafting Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round.
Yes.
Now, if you take it from what the Lions said, they value Jahmyr Gibbs more than Bijan Robinson, which is insane.
Yeah. I don't get that.
Now,
still,
granted,
true, but
Jahmyr Gibbs is a fantastic running back. I'm not going to take anything away from him, but Bijan is just revolutionary in what he was doing on the field, and honestly, worth, for the first time in a long time, worthy of a first round pick in the draft, higher than like in the 20s. I really hope that Amon-Ra St. Brown has another fantastic season. That was absolutely magical to watch last year. And like their wide receiver group isn't that bad. Obviously the Jameson Williams suspension very much hurts. But he'll be back next year. Did you guys see the memo that the NFL put out about gambling, the reinforcement of the 6 rules?
I saw it. I didn't read it because I didn't read it. But
I didn't read it either. I didn't want to. I was like, all right, whatever. Offensive line, fantastic. I'm ready for season 2 of Aiden Hutchinson. He was everything that was billed to be last year. A fantastic rookie season and looks to be a huge force for them. Rodrigo, Alex Anzalone, Jack Campbell. I love the linebacker group. They made improvements in the secondary. It's the Lions division to lose.
I think so too. Yeah.
Weaknesses, tight end. Not seeing a lot. I'm really hoping that James Mitchell is able to come back from his injury last year. The governor from Virginia Tech, Sam Laporta, they also drafted him. So we'll see what happens, but just a lot of uncertainty there. There is not a lot of depth in the wide receiver room, so that's a little bit of concern if there is an injury. But I don't really feel like this team has a lot of glaring weaknesses. It's more of like, they could improve here, but they should be all right.
What do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I agree that it's like a team that has a very high floor the way it's built. So I'd say one of the bigger strengths is just like overall roster construction. They're sufficient everywhere, and that feels like it was very intentional based off of everything they did this offseason. I think in this system, Jared Goff is a positive. Like he's not hurting you like he was in the end of his days in LA. The run game, I think, is the offensive line is just freak show good. They've got Penei Sewell is turning elite before our eyes. Frank Ragnow's always been elite. They've got good players up and down the offensive line. Their running back room improved. Jamal Williams breaks Barry Sanders' record for most touchdowns in a season, and then they just turn around, completely reshape the room and improve it.
Hilarious.
So
honestly,
you've got David Montgomery who's going to be able to
Craig
tote.
Reynolds.
Oh yeah, he's still there.
No.
But David Montgomery is going to be able to be your volume carry guy, where Gibbs you're going to be able to weaponize. I hope Gibbs outtouches Montgomery in the aggregate. I'm not 100% sure that happens, but like it's a good balance to the room. Defensively, I don't think they have a lot of strengths. This is why I said that their overall construction is a strength, because they don't have like any glaring strengths to me.
No.
I think their edge room has upside. I think their linebacker room has upside. I love Rodrigo. I love the story. I love the character that he was on Hard Knocks. I don't want him in my starting linebacker duo. Just limitations we saw on tape last year. The run game, he's not everything I need him to be.
Oh yeah.
Jack Campbell was a valid addition. Rodrigo is better than Alex Anzalone or Derek Barnes anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. And then the secondary, I'm hesitantly calling a strength because of all the investments they made. They completely changed it. They got rid of Jeff Okudah. They bring in Cam Sutton. They bring in Emmanuel Mosley. They bring in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They bring in Brian Branch, completely turning over everybody in the secondary, and I think it's going to be a strength for the team. But their real strengths come in the coaching staff and the offensive line. The rest of the roster is just up to a certain level now, a competitive level, but not great.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing for this team this year, and that's why the draft especially, and then what they did in free agency, it was all about taking away the holes that teams ran right on through last year that kept them from being a playoff team ultimately, right? So they did things that maybe weren't about raising the ceiling of this team super high. It's about getting that floor up off the ground high enough where they're not going to start 1-6 and have to go down the stretch and just to survive and have a chance to make the playoffs. They need to have a more consistent week to week ceiling and floor in general. And this team, as constructed, I think is at least going to be a top 20 at least defense, right? If you can be a top 20 defense with the offense they played last year. That's all you need to do in the NFC, especially. You don't have to be a top 10 defense in the NFC with the offensive coaching that they have and the offensive skill talent. Realistically, this team, really the floor ceiling situation is what Goff do you get? Do you get Jared Goff last year? Because if you get Jared Goff last year, you're probably winning 12 games. Realistically, that's probably what's going to happen, because last year that it was a perfect mesh of a guy that just was be able to take what they gave him. He's an accurate passer. When he does get the chance to uncork a deep ball, it does look great. Doesn't always end great, but it looks great when he does it. If Jameson Williams, when he does come back from a suspension, which I think is 10 games, right? I think is what it is 10 games for him. Last I checked, I think is what it should be.
Yeah, I forget.
If he can come in,
it'll probably get reduced too, if I had to guess.
Realistically, but if he finishes down the stretch, if he can come in hot and be that deep threat, the receiving depth is a little bit questionable. Marvin Jones is older, but at least he fills a role. Josh Reynolds has been honestly pretty good for them since they brought him in. It's all about Amon St. Brown. If he's himself, what he's been the past 2 years, this offense will be just fine, especially with the running back group. Dave Montgomery's better. Jamal Williams, in my opinion, just more dynamic. You hope that even in year one that Gibbs can be better DeAndre Swift. That's kind of what I think you're looking at there. I don't know what the touch is going to be. Yeah, exactly. The touches I do think are questionable, Tony. I want to know. I wish I knew right now, not just for fantasy purposes, but because I'm curious what the usage is going to be. What kind of touch distribution are these guys going to have? Because I feel like it could get really weird, depending on how much Gibbs is used as a runner as versus receiver. Which it sounds like the receiving game is really where he's going to make an impact. But
yeah,
yeah,
if
that's
I
where
had
it
to guess,
stands,
it'll be like 150 to 200, 150 to 175 carries plus like 75 targets. I think they're going to force feed him, but it's not going to be the rushing production that everybody's expecting out of a top 12 back.
He's really gonna be more of a true receiving threat. I think, especially in year one. Like it's just an easier transition. I feel like for him to make in this offense with the guy that can carry the ball like Montgomery can. But again, let's just do the predictions here. Let's get that taken care of. I know Zach's got to get out of here in a minute. We'll finish up. We'll hold the torch for the frauds of the year for last year.
Yeah. You already know how I feel about Minnesota.
we
You
don't-
don't need me
yeah,
to put my
yeah,
spiel out here again.
Exactly. So I'll just kick things off here. So I think that they are in a worst case scenario if Goff returns to bad Jared Goff and the receiving room doesn't really produce outside of Amon St. Brown, and the defense is either dealing with issues because the secondary is new and just doesn't mesh well. They could finish around 8-9, 9-8 like they did last year. I think they could have a similar season for different reasons. I think that this team could win 12 games, maybe even more than that if they really just take off, especially if the defense can solidify itself and make itself a top 20, top 15 unit consistently throughout the year. And Goff really just keeps that torch going that he started last year whenever he really surprised a lot of people. I know he surprised me. I did not think he was going to be as good as he was. Ben Johnson returning is huge as well. Like he get probably only one more year out of him, I assume, especially if the year goes well. He's going to be a head coach for somebody next year. But that combination of Goff and Johnson has been really good last year. If that continues, again, I think 12-5 is something you can see from this team. So, but what do you think, Zach?
Yeah, if I have to give my firm this is what I think they end up at, I think 10-7. They're the only team in the division that I'm comfortable with calling a division sweep for. I don't think any of the other teams can sweep the division. So, I mean, if they're able to do that right away, that's 6 wins, and you're already in a fantastic spot. Like we've said, all 4 of these teams in the division are in the same tier, which is really good. It's not like the NFC South where they're in a bad tier. They're in okay, they might be able to make a splash in the postseason tier.
Firmly mediocre tier.
Firmly mediocre tier.
Yeah.
But I just feel that Detroit is better than all of the other teams in this division just by it's not even by a lot, just by a step and a half. And that's where I'm okay, you guys, yes, if it happens, you'll be the team to do it. But I think I agree. I think best case scenario, you could see a 12-5, 13-4 season from
Vikings just did it last year, and they were not as good as the Lions.
My question is, if we see bad Jared Goff and Hendon Hooker does get cleared to play, how do you think we see him this season?
Not this year.
If it's truly that bad.
I don't think this year because there's no
the last few
upside to
games.
That. I mean, if they're out of it, and they just don't have any reason to play Goff, then sure. But I don't think you see Hooker unless Goff gets hurt or it's a throw-in game at the end of the year. They don't need the win, right? If they don't need to play their starters, I just won he's a third-round player who's coming off major injury who isn't going to have all the reps that he needs. There's really not a lot of upside to force that guy on the field unless you have to, in my opinion. Even if it makes sense. So, end of the year for different reasons, sure, but I don't think unless Goff is he'd have to be so dreadful that he's unplayable. He's ruining the offense just by existing. That's how bad it would have to probably get. So.
Yeah, to be like Nathan Peterman.
Yeah, exactly. So, but what do you think, Tony?
Yeah, I think the floor. I still think the floor is kind of low. The defense just has me concerned because if the offense does take a step back, which you guys have both laid out why that could happen and how much of a possibility that is. The offense takes a step back and the defense, secondary is better, but they didn't address the thing that I thought was the problem, which was the defensive interior. I think that turning either of your second-round picks, which were Sam Laporta and Brian Branch, turning one of those into Keanu Benton would have me feeling a lot better about this team. You're welcome for that plug.
No, we're not going to gratify that.
I still think their floor is they could bottom out at 5 or 6 wins.
If things really go poorly. For sure.
And I don't think it even takes an injury to get there, which is why I'm willing to say it. I think it takes a step back from players that we have seen play poorly before. And then their ceiling I'm pretty optimistic about. I think they can get to like 11 wins. I do think that that defensive interior, the run stopping ability, is going to kill them against the better teams in the NFC, which is why I don't think their ceiling is super high. But
hey, don't discredit former Steelers legend Isaiah Buggs.
I will discredit Isaiah Buggs to his face.
Listen, he was all right last year, I thought.
Yeah, he was all right. He's an improvement, but Isaiah Buggs being an improvement is exactly why I'm concerned about the group.
Well, real quick before we finish up, Tony, what do you think about Lee McNeil transitioning in more of a true 3-tech role this year?
I'm excited.
Right?
That's
kind of why
he's one guy who can like break out and
yeah, I like that a lot.
Leave me less concerned about the group.
Right. That's what I thought.
Also, Levi Nwukurize, maybe he decides to play football one day.
That would be cool.
And this team, let's also point out, this was the only team with a positive point differential in the division.
Yeah,
last year.
of course.
Plus 26. Plus 26. The Packers were -1. The Vikings were -3, and the Bears were -137.
So I was right about the Vikings.
The second, but the second closest to last place was a bit of a stretch. The Packers and Vikings are like two apart.
They were still worse.
Technically correct is still correct.
Technically correct is still correct. Yes. But I would love to continue with you guys, but I do have a brunch to go to. So you all have a wonderful time talking about the biggest frauds in the division. And
I'm sure we'll have a great time.
It's time for the Kirk Cousins experiment to end.
All right, that could be
enjoy your brunch.
Yeah, that's how you sign off. See you in a sec. But all right, so let's finish up with the Vikings. It's been a long episode, as it always is, because we like to talk about that type of stuff. But avoided the tangents for the most part, I will say. So at least we got Zach through most of the teams here. But moving on to the Vikings, let's take some time on them now that we can. I have in my notes, of course, Vikings. Usually I just have Vikings and then like start my strengths, weaknesses. I have fraud right next to their name first, just to remind myself of that. It's just such a weird season to kind of gauge going into this year, because we all know that this team was not a 13-win team in terms of talent, in terms of play on the field. It was a lot of shenanigans is the best way I can describe it that got them to 13 wins. And when that happens, it's great, but you do have to take advantage of that situation, and they didn't. They do lose to the Giants in the wild card round. They don't get a chance to kind of build good faith in the fact, I know 13 wins was too much for a team with a negative 3-point differential, but we can make that work in the postseason too, and they couldn't do it. So where do you go from here? I think that's kind of where you have to start with the Vikings. So let's start with their strengths here. We kind of know their defined strengths, I think. Wide receiver, especially adding Addison to that group. Losing Thielen, who wasn't just the same player that he used to be for them anymore. I think that's
a positive swap out.
It is a positive swap out. The pass rush, when healthy, I think the duo that they have on the outside can be really effective, but health is such a major concern that I hesitate to even put it as a strength, because one of those guys goes down and question marks start flying with the pass rush. Often their offensive tackle duo, I think, especially with the way Darrisaw played last year in his second year, if he can avoid the concussions, which that sucks anytime a guy gets in trouble with that tackle duo is huge for a team that's going to probably pass the football a lot. So that's really nice for them. Any other strengths that you want to highlight with them at this point?
No, that's really it.
And that's the problem. That's kind of what I wanted to get into, is they have a few defined strengths, and then it's like kind of this weird middle tier of groups in some occasions, and then weaknesses, like the interior offensive line. Like, I don't hate Ezra Cleveland. Bradbury's gotten better every year, but he's still not a great center by any means. And then what do you get out of Ed Ingram, who's supposed to start at this point? Like, that interior
year one wasn't great, but
exactly.
Maybe he takes a step.
It's a question mark though. Like, the edges should be taken care of, but everything inside might be an issue. Is Madison able to be the lead back for this team and make an impact in the run game enough? I do like him, so I'm hesitant to say that it's a weakness, but you are losing one of the most productive running backs for the past 4 years in Dalvin Cook with that cut to get rid of him as well. Cornerback, there's one guy who's played significant snaps, and I think he's a good player, but he's not an elite player. And then it's all just question marks. Like, that entire secondary outside of Harrison Smith, who is only getting older, is one huge giant question mark, basically, outside of the addition of Byron Murphy. So just kind of hard to gauge what this defense is capable of, I think, especially.
Yeah, I think the cornerback room... It's ugly. It's ugly. It's got some youth with athleticism though. So like
it does.
Because you
there's
Andrew
upside
Booth,
potential there.
Like if let's say Andrew Booth stays healthy and plays like we expected him to when we all thought he was going to be a first round pick last year.
Awesome.
I know there were a lot of fans of Mekhi Blackman in this year's draft, and then like Byron Murphy in his own right is all right. So like they could potentially put 3 serviceable corners out there. And then think about what the scheme asks of those people. The scheme asks more of them than they have ever been asked of in their lives, and we're talking about trying to get serviceable there. That's a concern.
That's part of the problem. I like Brian Flores being hired to be the defensive coordinator for this team, but he does not have the corner room that you'd ideally want to have going into your first year as a coach for this team. Like Blackman did a lot of the stuff that he's going to be asked to do in this scheme in college because he kind of was the only USC corner worth a damn last year, but he is a late third round rookie. Like that's just a lot to ask of anybody. I mean, any corner being asked to play in this scheme is a tough ask, but asking him to. Booth is a guy who's had injury issues. Now he's going to have to get up in the face of people and play, tough-nosed man coverage. He's going to be in the mix of things more than ever, and that's probably not best for him realistically if we're talking about health-wise. And then, you're one guy that has played a lot, Byron Murphy. That's great. If he's the only corner on this team that's an above-average player or even an average player, you're going to get torched, even in a division that runs the football and wants to run the football. There's also guys in this division that can beat you really easily outside. So,
yeah, this is a really interesting one because this team, and when we get into the predictions, I'm going to sound pretty optimistic on them.
Right.
I'm thinking, but like they're very clearly all in on their offense. So I think most important to call out, they are very openly in the middle of a competitive rebuild. And that's the terminology they've chosen. That's the terminology that I think describes what they've been doing. They're not selling everything and starting anew. They are trying to keep a few cornerstones in place as they commit a lot of turnover on the rest of the roster. And so I still think this is a team that can compete. And I think this is an offense. I think the offense got better on paper, at least. It's Kevin O'Connell year 2 with Kirk Cousins. I think Kevin O'Connell's awesome. So they scored 424 points last year. They were good for 7th in the NFL. I think they're going to improve, which means their defense I think is going to be terrible, but it's also going to be chaotic with Brian Flores calling things. I do appreciate that if you don't have talent, the idea of running a more chaotic scheme to try to just increase variance, I respect that. Yeah. So they're going to be what am I trying to say here? They're going to be in shootouts all around, and they have a really good offense. This is a team that could once again be terrible and win a bunch of games. They're set up to potentially do the same thing again.
That's the thing about it, though, is I actually do think, and this is all, I know I was just kind of hard on them a second ago. This is all to say that I think that they're going to be a better football team next year, but they're not going to win as many games. Realistically, they won't, because so much of it was shenanigans, as I talked about, luck.
Yes.
The Bills game, don't want to talk to you about that, Tony. I apologize to even say it because it was disgusting to watch. Hated it. It was awful. Not even because I love the Bills. It just was a really weird, bad game. And then the Colts, man, they could have helped us avoid some of this stuff. They could have helped avoid some of this stuff, but they just couldn't do it. So much had to happen for them to win 13 wins. They probably will lose, at least, in my opinion, at least 2 or 3 more games, almost no matter what. And it probably doesn't mean anything in terms of whether they're good or not. It just doesn't. They're going to just win probably more normal games. That's just what's going to happen. They're not going to get blown out as much, I think, as this defense can't be worse, really. It's really hard for it to be worse. Just like you said, just Flores coming in and playing that style of defense is probably going to be enough to get a couple teams just to screw up and have to throw a couple picks and make mistakes. At least force them to do something opposed to just giving them free run the entire time. It's going to happen where there's going to be some weeks where the defense is at least not a bottom 5 unit, and then there's going to be some weeks they can't cover anybody because they're just not as good as the other team. So at least there's some variance there. And the offense, it better be real damn good because they have everything you need to be good. You lose Dalvin Cook. I don't know if the running game is going to be as good, but Madison has been really good when he's been asked to play. And
I think the running game, the running back room fits the team more now because Dalvin, like, he was awesome, but what he lost was his ability to play through contact. He just started avoiding contact. So that's why we saw that the home runs remained. He doesn't lose his athleticism.
No,
he
still
lost
got
his
the
desire to play in between the tackles.
Yes.
And
which
by bringing in Alexander Madison and Dwayne McBride, who are by far not as good players, they are much better running through the tackles. And I think they fit it. Yeah. Like the running back room makes sense with what the team is because like they have the somewhat weak interior. They are going to want to be running like it fits. It makes sense. I understand what they did at running back.
Yeah. It makes sense. It does. It's just like, is it going to be a downgrade, production wise? Probably a little bit. There won't be obviously the big home run plays, which is part of why they were able to win last year because they got the big chunk plays sometimes from Cook, but there should be more consistency there and just a better ability to call some of the more inside and more power stuff. In general, like I said, I do think that this is going to be a better football team on the field this year. I just don't think it's going to equal as many wins because I do think one of the lines are a little bit better, so I think they'll have a higher ceiling. But, getting into predictions, like, I think that they could be like an 8-9 team just because, again, the defense could completely bottom out. And if the offense isn't as good, if Kirk Cousins doesn't at least maintain his level of play over the past couple of years, God forbid Justin Jefferson tweaks his ankle even for like 2 games, that's probably 2 losses realistically. Like, so it's the floor is a little bit lower than I think that it's been just because of that potential. But then the ceiling, it's not 13 wins, but 10, 11 games. I think they can win, especially if the offense really just takes off and the defense doesn't get blown out as much. Like, it's really weird to talk about this because I feel not way better, but I feel better about them this year than I did at any point last year. I think that there's a potential at least for there to be some games the defense doesn't fall apart.
Yeah, I definitely felt better about them last year, but I was also high on them last year. I picked them to win the division. I was the one
watching them last year, not like predicting them forward.
Yeah, because week 2 last year, I was the one saying that one of Kevin O'Connell or Nick Sirianni was going to win Coach of the Year. I was in on the
Nick
Vikings.
Really took it to him.
Yeah, but I do think that this team, because of the defense, I'm comfortable with them being second in the odds, but I almost think it would make more sense if they were the favorites. Something that's going to be really interesting, and I'm just pulling this up now because I was like, I don't know who I predict, Lions or Vikings. The last 3 weeks of the season, we have Christmas Eve, the Vikings host the Lions. New Year's Eve, they host the Packers. January 7th, they're at the Lions. Those are their last 3 games of the season. So, I think we've arrived at thinking it's probably between the Lions and the Vikings, and the Packers have an outside shot, but like they're not really involved. We're gonna basically just have like two Lions Vikings games in a matter of 2 weeks at the end of the season, or in a matter of 3 weeks that decide the division. It's going to be an incredible.
I think that is certainly in the cards for that to be the case, and I think the Packers could be the team that decide that if they can beat the Vikings in that game, if they can send them home essentially and make them have to play and win against the Lions on the road, that might be the decider. Honestly, that could be the case because I think a Packers team that at that point in the season better equipped to pull an upset over a team like the Vikings. So, but it's really going to be interesting with this division in general. I think that again, the 3 teams that were at the top last year are still probably the teams that are the most likely to stay there, just in a different order. But all these teams have potential to, even like the Bears, like what you talked about, like if everything hits, every one of these teams have a valid argument for a potential playoff chase, at least, if maybe not a playoff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they're all eligible, right?
Exactly.
Like we're not disqualifying them.
We're not at
anybody going into the season.
We're not in the NFC South, AFC South situation right now. Like that's not where we're at. So, again, a fun division. I'm really curious to see how the Kirk Cousins era ends. What I want to happen, Tony, and this is because I think it'd be the funniest way for it to happen, is this to be the year they actually get to like a championship game with him. And that's
just cruel.
I know, but like, because it tells you like it was possible. It just didn't happen. Like I want the Vikings like to, and I hate to do this because this is a team that has been tormented for its entire history, basically. Like, being a fan of Minnesota sports in general is just like, why are you doing that? Honestly, like, because every one of those teams have like some sort of tragic situation going on. It feels like at different times. But like, imagine getting to a championship game where you get to the cusp that you got to with Case Keenum of all people, of course, and you get there, and let's say you're facing the Eagles, and you just get dog walked because the Eagles are better than you. It would be so like tragic, but also like, man, what could have been if we just what could have been if we just had this team in this spot where it's at right now, but had 2 more years of like Kirk Cousins on a contract, and like didn't have a situation where we can't afford to like really keep this going because it's stupid at this point. Like, that's kind of what I feel like that could happen this year. That would be very, very, like you said, poetic and kind of hilarious, honestly, too. But
yeah, the last year of Kirk Cousins, he just goes off, and then we're all just like, what?
There's like 40 touchdowns. Yeah, there's like 40 touchdowns. Jefferson has like 2,000 receiving yards. Like it, and that. So this is the last thing I want to mention with the Vikings before we sign off here. What do you think the Justin Jefferson contract extension is going to look like?
Allow me to look up what the current wide receiver market is, because I have a number in mind. I just want to make sure
the top of the market I
am
believe
within
is
range.
30 million right now is the highest. I believe Hill's contract is the highest per year.
Right,
at 30 million.
Where can I contracts table? That's what I'm looking for.
I believe
my handy dandy over the cap.
Yes, over the cap. Gotta use it
always. And let's sort by average per year. Yep, Tyreek Hill, 30 million. Okay, so the number that I initially had was 35. I think I'm going to stick with that. I think he gets 35.
So my thought has been similar to you, but I think it's going to be a 5-year, $170 million contract, which is about 34 per year.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that plays.
I think that's what it's going to be, roughly that amount of time. And it's so funny because, like, watching him these first 3 years, I'm really curious because, like, the way he plays and everything, if he plays long enough, how high is he going to get up on the receiving leaders board? Like, because, like, there's that upper echelon that you can get to in that 14, 15,000 receiving yards, and then there's that gap that Jerry Rice will probably forever maintain. It feels like how can he get up there? I feel
what
like
has he averaged over his?
I know that he right now, like through 3 years, he's like 600 yards ahead of anyone else for their first 3 years. Like, he's on a crazy pace. I just don't remember what the exact number is, but
yeah,
I think it's 1,500 plus, if I'm not mistaken.
View player parade.
He's on a 1,600 yard pace per year.
16 per? Okay.
Yes. He'd have to do that for 10 years to get up into that upper echelon.
Yeah, I think he can clear the 15,000 mark, and then
yeah,
there's just so much uncertainty. It's hard to project
because
it's
just about how long he plays and how effective he is with other quarterbacks. But
yeah, like they're gonna not have Kirk Cousins once he's in his contract, right? So like, do they have a rookie quarterback? Because then that number goes up. But if not, is he looking at getting traded? Are they like, what are they bringing in? Is it? I don't know. It's so hard to project a career out that far.
Yeah,
he's very clearly capable of reaching like very, very record highs.
I haven't seen someone come in who I really thought could challenge for the Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Larry Fitzgerald level of production. And seeing him come in and do what he's done is just like, I want it to happen. You know what I mean? Like, I want someone
I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, like I want it to happen, and so I'm hoping he can. That's just a little tangent, but unless you have anything else you want to add about the Vikings, Tony, that'll do it for us this week. Next week we are going to be doing that's where we're at. Yeah, that's kind of the crux of the issue is the Vikings. Anything could happen with this team. We found out last year, but next week we are going to do the AFC North. So of course, going to make sure that I put my thinking cap on for my Steelers. Can't wait for you guys to either hopefully agree with me, and if you don't, I will definitely challenge you on it with as much information as I have available to me. But no, the AFC North is going to be a complete bloodbath as it always is, and I'm kind of here for it. So we'll talk about that. It's going to be
one of my favorite divisions to follow this season. It's going to be a bloodbath.
It's nuts what's going to happen, but we'll see what we can do with that. But we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you are especially an AFC North fan, definitely tune in for next week.